The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. The Case of the Royal Gardens. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. In southwest London, in Kew, are the Royal Botanical Gardens. It is an immensely large park with an artificial lake, Chinese pagoda, and a variety of pretty gardening artworks. The centerpieces of the gardens, however, are the tempered greenhouses, which are impressive constructions of steel and glass, symbols of English engineering. Comparable tropical and subtropical glass houses only exist in Munich and Vienna, while the counterpart that is in Berlin, whose skeletal structure was absurdly built of wood, was rightfully consumed by the fire. The exact reason why Holmes and I had actually come here has to be explained as follows. Dr. Kurtzman, who was committed to assist me therapeutically to process my experiences from Highgate Cemetery, thought it would be beneficial for my recovery if I would take a quiet trip to the countryside or the coast at least once a week. And Holmes, acting upon his duties as a friend, had agreed to accompany me, though he was still a little reluctant, and he made no secret of that fact. With neither the sea nor the English rural population as his preferred environment, Kew Gardens remained as a kind of compromise. However, Holmes seemed a little annoyed. We were just on our way to the central palm house, which had been built between 1841 and 1849, and where the tropical plants were colonized and grown, when I made an optimistic attempt. "Well, Holmes," I began after a minute of silence, "what do you think about this magnificent park?" Holmes stopped and turned around slowly. "My dear Watson," he said with a surprising smile, "you do still recall that I said that I would definitely not enjoy this trip?" "Yes, of course," I answered expectantly. Holmes looked around, while his face regained serious features. "I was right," he said, and continued walking down the path quickly. That was when I noticed that I had actually forbidden myself to have false hopes regarding this trip. So I walked a few steps behind him until I eventually caught up to Holmes. "But you have to admit," I panted, "that Her Majesty's gardens, in their orderly diversity, astonishing grace, and sheer infinity, are an extremely fitting metaphor for the British Empire." Holmes stopped again. "If you are looking for the substance of the empire," he said, "then you should rather take a look at the Welsh coal mines, the Liverpool shipyards, the Manchester textile factories, the Glasgow steelworks, or the cannon foundries of Newcastle. However, if you insist on making this a botanical allegory, only a carnivorous plant would be suitable." After a short break, which was due to my astonishment at this unsuspected statement, I growled, "You should probably limit your correspondence with Mr. Engels." Then I started walking faster than Holmes towards the palm house. In hindsight, I realized that Holmes just wanted to silence me, and I had fallen into his trap. Soon after, we reached the imposing glass house in the middle of the park and headed to the entrance. There we already saw, from a distance, a crowd of people that was blocking the gate. Apparently, the palm house had been closed at short notice. While Holmes immediately suggested for us to head home, I, for my part, wanted to at least know what was hindering us from walking through this tropical jungle that would await us inside the glass house. So I pushed through the crowd, dragging Holmes along behind me. And, in fact, at the end of the crowd, we found ourselves in front of a barrier, guarded by 2 security agents. "What might possibly be going on in there?" I asked, while trying to catch a glimpse inside the farmhouse. "Maybe the Imperial Brilliance needs a little polishing," Holmes scoffed. "Or they had to exterminate the bark beetle. Anyways, we are not going to visit the glass house today." Holmes was in the middle of turning around and walking away when one of the security guards approached us. "Mr. Holmes," he shouted. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective?" The addressed stopped. "Quite right," he confirmed. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. John Watson." Now the man stepped closer to the barricade and introduced himself. "My name is James Taylor. I am the supervisor of the security team in Kew Gardens." "My pleasure," I replied. "How can we assist you?" Mr. Taylor began to whisper. "Inside the farmhouse we are confronted with an extremely unpleasant, even somewhat unappetizing situation. At the same time, we don't want to cause a stir." I looked around. The crowd had grown. Everyone was trying to learn more about what was going on in the glass house. "It may be a little too late for that," I said soberly. Mr. Taylor sighed. "Gentlemen," he declared in a soft voice, "there has been an incident. A body was found in the farmhouse." Holmes's eyes flashed. If his awful trip to the London hinterlands would suddenly provide an opportunity to deal with blood and thunder, he would be reconciled immediately. "You don't say," he said, trying to remain casual. "So you think this incident that has occurred is induced by man?" "Don't get me wrong, Mr. Holmes," Mr. Taylor replied, "but I do hope so, in a way at least. Otherwise we would be facing an even bigger mystery." Holmes and I looked at each other. Certainly he could read from my facial expression that I would prefer to continue our walk towards the pond, but he had already made his irrevocable decision. "Well then," he told Mr. Taylor, "since we are here and we did not make any other plans, we can at least take a look at it." "That would be very kind and helpful," Mr. Taylor replied, obviously relieved. "I was hoping that you would suggest this." Then he opened the barricade. "Come on, I'll take you to the crime scene." "The location," Holmes corrected. "For now, this is only the place where the body was found." Mr. Taylor nodded. "Of course. I am certain you have never seen anything like this. It is very impressive." He went ahead towards the entrance gate, where his colleague opened the doors for us. Holmes followed with energetic steps, whereas I reluctantly followed him. When the glass doors closed behind us, we immediately felt the serious climate change. Outside, we experienced early English fall, and inside we faced tropical temperatures with immense humidity. And immediately I was reminded of the Indian jungle, but that was probably the point of the matter. Holmes kept a straight face. "So, where is your corpse?" he asked impatiently. Mr. Taylor again stepped ahead. "If you would follow me, we have to go to the western wing." In single file, we traversed the corridors between the growing plants. To our left and right, growing exotic trees, shrubs and flowers. I must apologize for my lack of botanical knowledge, but certainly there were a few palm trees and orchids amongst all the plants. Finally, we arrived at a small clearing that simultaneously marked a crossing. In fact, Mr. Taylor did not promise too much. We were standing in front of a large, completely unknown to me, plant, whose cone-shaped middle part protruded a good 1.5 meters upwards and was about 2.5 meters high. The imposing funnel, with a diameter of maybe 1 meter, must have been some kind of inflorescence, and exuded a rather unpleasant and slightly rotten smell. We immediately noticed that it was in fact open at the top and apparently quite sturdy, since 2 human legs stood out at the top. Our body was draped upside down in the huge flower calyx. "For heaven's sake," I stammered quietly, while Holmes soberly stated, "Indeed, this is new." "Fortunately," Mr. Taylor explained, "we discovered this mess before the farmhouse opened. We immediately notified Scotland Yard, but it will take at least another hour for them to arrive." "For the time being, we are here," said Holmes confidently. Wherever he took that confidence from remains a mystery to me. "We will see what we can find out by the time they arrive. For now, the question arises, do you know the deceased?" "Unfortunately, yes," Mr. Taylor replied. "I noticed it right away on the boots. It is our gardening apprentice, Mr. Gregory Palmer. A young and lanky man, physically and mentally almost like a child. He has been with us for only 2 weeks, to train. The poor boy." "If Mr. Palmer was still in training," I interjected, "then he was certainly somewhat inexperienced. Could it possibly have been an accident?" Holmes shook his head decisively. "Hardly," he replied. "It would have had to have been an extremely unfortunate chain of unlikely events. Fact is, Mr. Palmer would not have gotten up there without help, and certainly not inside. At most, he would have needed a ladder, but there is no trace of it. In my opinion, it can be safely assumed that the lifeless body was deposited inside the flower. The fact that the feet protrude is probably due to a given haste on the part of the perpetrator. There is no doubt that this is a murder." "This is hard to grasp," Mr. Taylor stuttered with a pale face. "Mr. Palmer was very popular. All the employees took a great liking to him. He was such a nice, cheerful boy, always helpful, always a smile on his face." Before Mr. Taylor could go into more rhapsodies, I drew the attention back to the investigation. "Who found the body?" "It was Mr. Blackwater on his daily morning route," Mr. Taylor replied. "He is my colleague who is guarding the entrance. You have already seen him?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, I recall. We will have to question him later." "Of course," said Mr. Taylor. "Mr. Blackwater will be at your disposal. In the meantime, I can inform you that he found the body around 9:30. I was informed immediately and rushed here. We did not change anything, closed the glass house to the public at once, and called the police." Holmes walked up and down a few feet. "Of course, you did the right thing," he explained and stopped. "Who was in the farmhouse at that time?" Mr. Taylor did not have to think for long. "Only 2 people," he said. "The chief gardener, who oversees the farmhouse as well as being Mr. Palmer's instructor, Mr. Greenfell, and Mr. Redwood, our tropical botanist and scientific director." While I forbade myself from making a cheap joke about the employees' last names and their colourfulness, Holmes was already on the move again, muttering a few incomprehensible words. Taylor looked at me inquiringly, and I assured him with a quick double nod that everything was all right. "Well then," Holmes proclaimed, as he finally got right in front of us, "we should start with the questioning of Mr. Redwood. Would you be so kind, Mr. Taylor, to bring in your chief botanist?" "Of course," replied Mr. Taylor. "I am already on my way." With these words, he left Holmes and I alone. Finally, we were in a more private setting, so I pulled out my handkerchief and wiped the sweat off of my forehead. This artificial tropical heat bothered me quite a bit, while Holmes seemed to be immune to it. "Very well, my dear friend," I began, leaning my back against the planting table. "I have to admit that this situation is somewhat spectacular. Nevertheless, or rather because of it, I see no real starting point for a sensible investigation. The whole thing is quite a mystery. If this was not a tragic incident, one would call it utter nonsense. Maybe it would be better to leave this case to the police." "No, my dear Watson, just stay calm," Holmes replied. "We must not let this strange situation confuse us. The perpetrator possibly did not have enough time to finish his act. We need to stay focused and approach this case in our usual systematic way. Observation, analysis, questioning, and deduction. We still don't know the cause of death. Nevertheless, I don't think that he fell inside the flower with or without external influence. To solve this case, we must recover and examine the body and wait and see what the other employees have to say." Like always, Holmes was right. The leisurely excursion into the countryside, inside and outside the glasshouse, that Dr. Kurtzman prescribed, was cancelled, whether I liked it or not. As Holmes' companion, you apparently were not immune to death, corruption and crime, even in your free time. Thus, I accepted my fate. "Fine," I said, after a proper pause for thought. "So we have a suspected murder in closed rooms, quite extensive, but closed. On the outside they show glass walls, and on the inside there is a jungle thicket. If we include Mr. Taylor, there are 5 people left with access to the farmhouse, and one of them is dead. Conclusively, one of the other 4 remaining is the perpetrator." Holmes nodded. "Immaculate analysis. Perfectly combined and summarized," he attested. "And that means we already have more suspects than we need." Soon after, Mr. Taylor returned, accompanied by an older, professorial-looking man. It was Mr. Redwood, the botanist, as we would soon learn during the mutual introduction. Mr. Redwood, seemingly annoyed by the interruption of his other activities, repeatedly stroked his white beard and demonstratively cleaned his round glasses. "Well then, Mr. Holmes," he said, "as you can possibly imagine, I am, according to my position, a very busy man, and I have a great deal of responsibility for Her Majesty's exotic plantings. Start with the questioning, but keep it short." While I was a little irritated by his lack of manners, Holmes was not agitated at all. "We certainly don't want to steal any more of your time than necessary," he replied calmly. "That is why we should get straight to the point. Where were you when the dead body was discovered in the calyx this morning?" Mr. Redwood was immediately more indignant. "Are you actually suspecting me?" he shouted. "This is outrageous." "Not at all, Mr. Redwood," said Holmes. "We are merely trying to get a better picture about possible testimonies that could help us solve the case. Of course, you are at any time free to leave. However, we would rather have your assistance as a potential witness. As an academic, you certainly have excellent powers of comprehension and special intellect, don't you?" Mr. Redwood snorted, hesitated for a second, but in the end his vanity got the best of him. "All right, Mr. Holmes," he said with a now more friendly tone. "Of course. I will assist you with all my intellectual capabilities. Just like every morning, I was in the eastern wing around 8:30, inspecting our gardener's work before opening hours." "Did you find anything conspicuous?" Mr. Redwood denied. "No, Mr. Holmes. You probably know about the usual issues with helping personnel and subordinate assistants. Our gardeners are the kind of people that are absolutely able to dig a hole, but whenever it comes to taking care of exotic plants, they soon start hitting their mental and practical boundaries." "Are you talking about Mr. Greenfell?" I asked. "Indeed," Mr. Redwood said, who now forced himself to calm down. "I had to make a complaint to the management more than once about his incompetence." Holmes apparently barely took any notice of the allegations, even though their obvious dispute would provide evidence. "I understand," was all he murmured. "So, since you were doing your conscientious work at the other end of the farmhouse, there is no way you noticed anything. Is that right?" "Yes, indeed," Mr. Redwood replied. "But if you ask me, I would not be surprised if our helpers got into a fight with each other. Probably because of some nonsense, like a football game or the like. I can imagine that alcohol was also involved." Even this accusation Holmes did not seem to want to discuss any further. Instead, he steered the conversation in a completely different direction. "Mr. Redwood," he began after a short pause, "as a leading expert in tropical botany, you can certainly give me professional information about the unusual location of the body. What plant is this exactly?" "Of course," Mr. Redwood explained, who now took to this topic like a duck to water and approached the plant. "This is Nepenthes penthesilea, a remarkable representative discovered only a few years ago in the Amazon region from the genus of the pitcher plants, an exceptionally large specimen, a carnivore, of course." "So this really is a carnivorous plant?" I assured myself. "Indeed, Dr. Watson," Mr. Redwood confirmed. "The apparent bloom forms a closed cauldron or goblet that exudes an odour that certain insects, amphibians, and small mammals are attracted to. This part of the plant forms a sort of pitfall trap for their victim. Once an animal has climbed in or has fallen in, the smooth inner walls make every escape impossible. Digestive juices on the inside will immediately begin to decompose the trapped being alive." "I really do hope that," interjected Mr. Taylor. "The poor Mr. Palmer is not being digested right now." Mr. Redwood made a face because of that comment, but continued to focus on Holmes and me. "Mr. Taylor's naive fear is obviously unfounded," he said. "In comparison, a normal Venus trap takes a whole week to digest a housefly. Even if this example is many times larger, the decomposition of a human body theoretically would take several months or even a year, and this would precede natural decomposition. In fact, the Nepenthes penthesilea feeds on nothing bigger than frogs, or at most mice." "How comforting," said Mr. Taylor, taking a few precautionary steps away from the plant. Holmes, whose perfidious sense of the macabre struck briefly, was noticeably amused for a minute before he regained his usual concentration. "Thank you, Mr. Redwood," he said. "Your flowery descriptions will certainly be useful to us. We shall not waste any more of your precious time." Mr. Redwood left with a wordless nod and hurried down the hall. Holmes now turned towards Mr. Taylor. "Would you please bring Mr. Greenfell over here now?" "Very well," replied the security officer, and as he was about to leave, Holmes stopped him again. "Just a minute," he shouted, looking at the body trapped in the flower. "Please, ask Mr. Greenfell to bring a ladder." Mr. Taylor understood immediately and nodded. "Of course." As we were alone again, I tried to recap the preliminary findings. Mr. Redwood, assuming that he spoke the truth, could not help to solve this case. He stated that he was too far from the event. However, there was an exaggerated awareness of his academic status and a certain contempt for the other gardeners, whom he consequently believed to be responsible for any wrongdoing, even murder. "Everything correct, my dear Watson," answered Holmes, when I gave him that summary. "Apparently, it is not entirely impossible to find a reasonably useful employee." "As always, too kind, Holmes," I replied, without further discussing this little tease. "Anyways, we don't have too much, to be honest." Holmes responded with a calming gesture. "Don't worry," he said. "We are taking it gradually. There is still plenty of time before Scotland Yard arrives." I looked at Holmes suspiciously. "Is this what moves you?" I asked him. "To be faster than the police?" Holmes smiled. "Oh, no," he said firmly. "What are you thinking of? I don't want to be faster, but better than the police." While I was still not sure what to make of this statement, Mr. Taylor returned to us again. A few steps behind him was Mr. Greenfell, easily recognizable as a gardener by his clothes. He also brought the ladder that Holmes asked for. While approaching, Mr. Greenfell's gaze wandered for a second or two at the victim's feet, but immediately he turned away. Apparently he struggled to bear the sight. Now, standing in front of us, Mr. Taylor started to introduce him. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Greenfell, our master gardener, and was at the same time Mr. Palmer's instructor." Holmes and I nodded tentatively at the gardener, but he straightway reached out his hand, which, presumably from garden work, was still a little dirty. And before Holmes could shy away from shaking Mr. Greenfell's dirty hand, I shook it. "I am Dr. Watson, and this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, detective from London," I explained. Mr. Greenfell seemed a little impressed. "A real detective?" he asked Holmes. "Then you have certainly brought several culprits to justice." "Certainly," Holmes said. "Then please do me a favour, Mr. Detective," Mr. Greenfell abruptly continued. "Find my friend's murderer." Holmes only hesitated briefly, but then confirmed, "We are definitely going to catch them." Though I was, at that moment, less optimistic, I nodded vigorously so the questioning would start. "Mr. Greenfell," I explained, "we don't want to waste your time any more than necessary. Where were you at the alleged time of crime at 9:30 this morning?" "I was in the tool shed next door," Mr. Greenfell replied without thinking. "I was packing my equipment for work, though it took me a little longer than usual because I could not find my hedge trimmers." "I understand," Holmes said. "And your colleague, Mr. Palmer, where was he?" Again, Mr. Greenfell immediately replied, "He had already gone to the farmhouse to look after the orchids. The orchids were very dear to him. Every morning and every evening he visited them. They're right over there in the next hall." Now I took over the questioning again. "What was your relationship with Mr. Palmer? You were friends, right?" Mr. Greenfell looked to the ground. "We did not know each other very long," he replied, "but we got along right from the start. Sometimes I took care of the boy, because he was a little helpless from time to time." "At work?" I asked. "Yes, amongst other things," Mr. Greenfell responded. "He did also let others harass him very easily, especially supposed superiors like Mr. Redwood. People from security or the management bullied him. I taught him not to put up with everything and demanded due respect." Suddenly Holmes, who had seemed a little absent-minded, became agitated. "The orchids!" he shouted. "Can you show me the orchids?" Mr. Greenfell was a little surprised, but nodded willingly. "Of course," he said. "If you would like to follow me, we just have to turn around the corner." He went ahead. Holmes, Mr. Taylor, and I followed him. And there, at the beginning of the eastern hall, right at the crossing with that carnivorous plant, was a sea of flowers. "There," Mr. Greenfell said. "This is our main orchid collection. It consists of almost 200 species who stem mainly from the tropical areas of South America and Asia. Some of them are very rare and therefore extremely valuable." Holmes seemed to stare at the flowers absent-mindedly, and then muttered, "Uneven, patchy." And half a minute later he turned towards us again and said, "Good. Let us go back and finally recover the body." The meaning of all this was, to say at least, obscure to me. However, our focus for now was on recovering the victim that was still trapped inside the flower. Mr. Greenfell set up the double ladder next to the plant. Then he and I climbed up the ladder, one on each side. Together we carefully extracted the lifeless body. Then Mr. Greenfell embraced him like a small child and climbed down again. Mr. Palmer was very lank and did not weigh more than 100 pounds. When he laid down the body on the tarpaulin that was prepared for us on the ground, we immediately realized the actual cause of death. In Mr. Palmer's chest, around the area of the heart, there was a hedge trimmer. To be precise, it was Mr. Greenfell's hedge trimmer, the one that he had searched for in vain that morning. "I swear I don't have anything to do with that," Mr. Greenfell stammered, when he saw his gardening tool. "It's all right," Holmes replied. "Any employee could have taken them." "Just like the ladder," Mr. Taylor interjected. Holmes, who was bent over the dead man, straightened up again. "What do you mean?" "Well, Mr. Holmes," Mr. Taylor began, "when Mr. Greenfell and I wanted to get the double ladder this morning, it was not in its usual place, even though we placed it there last night. We found it close to the main entrance. Maybe that is also a lead." Holmes nodded. "It is," he said softly. "It was used to dispose of the body and then placed there hastily." Then he turned to me. "Well, Doctor, what can you tell us about the victim?" I knelt next to the corpse and examined the wound. "Due to the pointy shape of the murder weapon, there was barely any blood at first," I explained. "The murderer stabbed the victim right into the heart, and it quickly led to death. I am going to remove the hedge trimmer now." Slowly and carefully I removed the murder weapon from the victim's chest, which almost penetrated the victim to the back. Whenever I wanted to share this with the others, Holmes cut me off. "What is this?" he asked. "There is something at the tip. Is this a part of Mr. Palmer's clothes?" There was a small shred of fabric-like consistency hanging off the tip. But the victim's shirt seemed unscathed, apart from the puncture hole itself. I pulled the shred down and held it towards the light. "It is a shred," I said. "A piece of fabric or paper, torn off from the rest. Hard to say what it is. The thing is soaked in blood." I passed the shred to Holmes, who pulled out his magnifying glass and came to a surprising result within seconds. "That is a piece of a banknote," he said. "Looks like a £10 note." "That is strange," Mr. Greenfell said. "Palmer was poor. He never had that much money on him." Holmes looked at the banknote fragment and took a few steps up and down. Eventually he stopped and said, "The following happened. Mr. Palmer was holding the banknote in his hand when the murderer suddenly stabbed him. Presumably he wanted to fend off the shears with his bare hands, while the banknote got in between the tip and the body. The demolished part was skewered. The perpetrator took the rest. It was most of it." "But where did Palmer get the money from?" asked Mr. Greenfell. Holmes did not have to think too long. "Also from the perpetrator," he said. "It was probably an agreed handover of money. The perpetrator paid Mr. Palmer for something, but then changed his mind and killed him. And by taking back the money from the dead man, he made a big mistake." While I already had a clue, Mr. Taylor asked, "What do you mean? What mistake?" Holmes smiled contentedly. "I am going to clear everything up soon," he said. "Would you be so kind, Mr. Taylor, as to gather all the employees at the main entrance area? Mr. Greenfell, Mr. Redwood, and even Mr. Blackwater, even though we did not question him yet, as well. There we will also wait for the arrival of Scotland Yard." Mr. Taylor raised his shoulders. "As you please, Mr. Holmes. We shall meet him in 5 minutes at the entrance hall." Then he and Mr. Greenfell set out and left us alone. And before we would follow the others to the agreed meeting point, we covered Mr. Palmer's body temporarily. The shears and the fragment of the banknote we took with us as evidence. "I know what you are planning," I said, when we finally took the corridor to the main hall. "You want to piece together a puzzle." "Congratulations, my dear Watson," Holmes replied. "You are learning." The fine line between actual appreciation and possible ridicule briefly left me unsettled. I stopped for a second and noticed that we were standing next to the orchids again. "Holmes," I shouted, "what clue am I missing? What did you discover at the orchids?" Holmes turned around and came back a few steps. "Don't you see that?" he asked, pointing at the orchid field. By no stretch of the imagination I was able to notice anything suspicious, and had to confess, "No. What is it?" "The motive," Holmes explained. "Watson, you might be looking, but you don't recognize. The flowers were planted in a regular pattern. However, there are recent gaps that were not intended. And that was when I saw it as well." "You are right," I shouted. "Plants were taken from different parts." "Of course I am right," Holmes replied assertively, "and it is to be assumed that the orchids that were stolen were not exactly the cheapest, but the most expensive, with relevant value on the black market," I added. "But how does this relate to the victim and the perpetrator?" Holmes tapped his temples. "I have a theory about this," he said, "and we are going to put it to the test." When we arrived at the main entrance of the farmhouse, all 4 employees, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Blackwater, Mr. Redwood, and Mr. Greenfell, were already waiting for us. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, "I thank you for coming today, even though one of you is going to regret it soon. For one of you killed the young Mr. Palmer, and on top of that, dumped the corpse in the calyx of a carnivorous plant. But first things first. The Royal Farmhouse contains a considerable and valuable collection of orchids. I could not help but notice that it may have shrunk a little lately. Someone was stealing particularly expensive specimens to enrich themselves. Certainly, this would have gone on well for longer if Mr. Palmer had not found exceptional pleasure in the orchid field. He noticed the missing flowers and must have laid in ambush for the thief. But he did not report the thief to the administration or the police. Instead, he tried to have a slice of the cake for himself and blackmailed the orchid thief and demanded money so he would not tell. The thief, however, did not want to pay, so he stabbed Mr. Palmer with a head shear at today's handover. Unfortunately, all of this happened shortly before the gates would open to visitors. Thus the body had to disappear quickly. So it ended up inside the calyx of the Amazonian carnivore. Then the murderer had to get out. All of you said that you have been somewhere else at the alleged time of crime, just before 9:30 in the morning. Mr. Taylor was in the administration building. Mr. Blackwater was on his daily tour. Mr. Redwood was checking whether everything was in order on the eastern wing, and Mr. Greenfell was collecting his tools. But you did not meet each other, so nobody can confirm your alibis. This means that all of you are eligible as murderers. However, the killer made one mistake. He was a little careless. He left a small piece of a banknote on the victim. It was torn off the note and skewered on the shears in the deadly attack. If we find the other part of the banknote and our fragment fits, we have successfully convicted our perpetrator. Gentlemen, you know what is going to happen now. I must ask you to show me your wallet so we can check if the questionable banknote is in your possession. Of course, you have the right to refuse to do so, as Dr. Watson and I are only consultant detectives. In this case, however, Scotland Yard will be happy to carry out the relevant investigations once they have arrived, and this is likely to be the case at any given moment. That's it. Thank you for your patience. When Holmes was done with his speech and ignited his pipe that he had stuffed in the meantime, there was utter silence. No one spoke, no one moved. The 4 employees eyed each other with suspicion and tension. If the perpetrator wanted to make an attempt to escape, He would have had to have acted now. But things turned out differently. All of a sudden, Mr. Redwood grabbed Mr. Blackwater without a warning by his collar and shouted, "You wretched fool! You messed it up!" Mr. Blackwater broke free and pushed Mr. Redwood back. "Just shut up! They have nothing against us!" Even Holmes seemed surprised, while Mr. Taylor reacted quickly. "The both of you worked together," he said. "All of this was his idea," Mr. Blackwater exclaimed, pointing his finger at Mr. Redwood. "I don't even know anything about orchids." "But you killed Palmer," Mr. Redwood said. "I have nothing to do with the murder." "What was I supposed to do?" Mr. Blackwater asked. "He was getting greedy, wanting more and more money. He would have told on us." Mr. Redwood shook his head in resignation. "If you had not put the £10 note back in, they would not have any evidence." At that moment, 2 Scotland Yard officers knocked on the glass door, and Holmes went to the gate to open it. "Gentlemen," he said to Mr. Redwood and Mr. Blackwater, "you can now continue your confessions to the police." On our way home to Baker Street, I could not resist but asking Holmes about his almost failure in solving the case. "I am reluctant to say it, Holmes," I began, "but by a hair your plan would have gone wrong. Actually it did. If Mr. Redwood had not lost his nerve, they would have gotten away with it." "My dear Watson," Holmes answered calmly, "I will build my cases on science and deduction. I am trying to solve this case within the frames of human logic. This is undoubtedly the best methodology. Nevertheless, it always implies the possibility of failure. To be honest," I continued, "this time luck saved us from failure." Holmes shook his head decisively. "No, not luck. There are no coincidences. In the end, we have cornered the perpetrators. Only these circumstances provoked a reaction, all based on Mr. Redwood's unstable character." Holmes was apparently unwilling to concede that he, even in the beginning, had lost control for a brief moment, and did only recover because of a favourable fate. When I was already coming to terms with this, Holmes again raised concerns. "There is one thing left, though," he said thoughtfully. "Where did the missing banknote remain?" Of course, I did not know the answer to this either, and we continued the journey in silence. In fact, the banknote in question was not found in Mr. Blackwater's belongings. However, due to the mutual accusations and guilty pleas made by the 2 perpetrators, which they also repeated during the police interrogation, this was no longer relevant. Mr. Greenfell only found out on the next day that the banknote was actually left in the calyx of the carnivorous plant. They were able to recover it from the decomposing juices of the Nepenthes penthesilea.